Ever since the news broke out about heavier-than-air flight at Kill Devil Hills, North Carolina in 1903, men from across the country took the challenge to test the limits of flight. When the U.S. Army Signal Corps purchased the first aircraft for military purposes, junior ranking officers were trained in the operation of aircraft, and the enlisted stayed on the ground performing aircraft maintenance. However, there were a handful of members in the enlisted ranks that successfully assessed themselves to flight, but it was at a heavy price. With some, it was at the cost of segregation. For others, it was the ultimate price of their own lives. Today, I will talk to you about the enlisted firsts in the U.S. Air Force. Since there are so many firsts accomplished by the U.S. Air Force enlisted heritage, I'll talk to you about two of them, Frank S. Scott and Eugene Bullard, and what they were the first to accomplish in the Air Force. Let me start with the first member I want to talk about is Frank S. Scott. Tragically, he was cited for two firsts. Tragically, he was the first enlisted member to lose his life in an aircraft accident. On September 27, 1912, at the College Park Airfield in Maryland, Corporal Scott was promised a flight by Lieutenant Lewis C. Rockwell. When Lieutenant Rockwell determined the aircraft was okay, he landed and picked up Corporal Scott. The takeoff and the flight were fine, but when attempting to land, the engine failed, the aircraft lost its lift, and crashed to the ground. The crash took both lives. He was later honored by being the first and only enlisted member to have an Air Force base named after him. When the Army Air Corps enacted protocol for naming new military airfields after airmen who lost their lives during what's known as the experimental era, they decided that on July 20th, 1917, there's an airfield in Belleville, Illinois, just outside of St. Louis, was to be named Scott Field. Today we know this as Scott Air Force Base, which is the headquarters for Air Force's Air Mobility Command and the U.S. Transportation Command. So now that you know about Corporal Scott and what he was known for being the first in the Air Force enlisted history, the other enlisted member I want to talk to you about is Eugene Bullard. Eugene Bullard is known for being the first African-American enlisted pilot and the only African-American pilot during World War I. He was born in Columbus, Georgia in 1894. At the age of 12, Eugene was a stowaway on a ship bound for Scotland to escape racial discrimination in the South. When he arrived in Scotland, he would work all kinds of odd jobs, making his way from Glasgow, Scotland, to Liverpool, England, and until he eventually ended up in Paris, France as a prize fighter. Eugene joined the French Foreign Legion upon the outbreak of World War I in 1914 and rose to the rank of corporal. In 1916, he was wounded at the Battle of Verdun and was awarded the French War Cross for bravery. The wounds he suffered from the battle rendered him unfit for duty in the Foreign Legion. He then accepted a transfer to the Lafayette Flying Corps of the French Air Force, where he flew some 20 missions and is credited for shooting down 2 enemy aircraft. When the U.S. became involved in World War I, Eugene requested to fly for his home country, the United States. Even though he had numerous hours of combat flying with 2 confirmed kills, and he passed a physical examination, he was denied because the United States at the time did not allow blacks to fly in combat roles. Fortunately, though, he would get his place in U.S. Air Force history. On August 23, 1994, 33 years after his death and 77 years after his flight physical was denied, Eugene Bullard was posthumously commissioned as a second lieutenant in the U.S. Air Force by the Secretary of the Air Force. There's so many other stories of enlisted Air Force history, but this was just 2 of them. So let me conclude with this, that I spoke to you about these 2 men at the beginning of the Air Force's history, Frank S. Scott and Eugene Bullard, and how they wrote their legacy in the history pages of the Air Force. Specifically, what these two men had sacrificed and how they earned the recognition they deserved. I hope you enjoyed listening to these two great Americans, their lives and their contributions to the Air Force enlisted heritage. Thank you.